I watched this, y'all. I was so stressed out. I
Mm,
was like, what is happening right now? Um,
mhm.
so I'll just pose this to you, Jesse. What is it that keeps bringing you back to these projects that put our government on blast cinematically and
Yes.
trying to hold them accountable? Because I'm,
Yeah.
I'm there for all of it. I'm just saying.
I think I'm trying to get away from making political films, but how can I? Because, of this moment we're living through, and as an artist and storyteller, like I have to confront the questions that consume me, and I have to keep trying to find creative ways to confront those questions and tell those stories. And every time I swear them off, another one like War Game comes through the door, and I think this is extraordinary. This is a film I want to see. Tony and I made a film that is, you could call the prequel to this film 15 years ago. So we've been waiting 15 years to do this follow-up collaboration. It's also a film about a war game and the U.S. Army. So I think it was destiny. And I think it was a great way for me personally to process what we lived through January 6, 2021, which I think we're all as Americans struggling with. But also, we're looking for hope, right? And you mentioned this was a little bit scary. It is. But when I met these people who were putting this exercise together, Janessa, Linda Singh, Heidi Heitkamp. I like them and they inspired me. And they're not sitting on the sidelines. They're fighters and they're patriots, and they are trying to protect our democracy. And I thought I'm gonna hitch my wagon to their wagon train and see where it takes me.
I appreciate that. So basically, Tony roped you in. I got it. Which brings me to Tony. So you guys got these high level officials to participate and agree to do this film, knowing that, with them knowing that some of the knowledge that they have is going to be in a film that's going to live in perpetuity in terms of how our government works. Even though this was a war game, some of what they said is very, very true. How did you
Yeah.
get these people to participate in that, and let the world see it, game or no game? And Tony, I'll start with you.
Yeah, that's a good question. So, all the folks who role play and play the part of President Hotham and his inner circle of advisors are in a network of consultants and allies to Vet Voice, which is a national nonpartisan veterans organization. So they organized and staged the war game, which
Mhm.
was in response to an op-ed written in the Washington Post by 3 retired generals, calling for the government to war game the scenario of the next contested election, but this time with the idea that elements of the active duty military had become radicalized, and could potentially side with the losing candidate. Okay, so those retired generals, put this out to the world. This is an imminent threat. Vet Voice stood up and said, "We will do this. We will rise to the challenge, and we will organize a war game." So they were the ones who secured access and participation from all these fantastic real world folks with real world experience. We gained access to document this war game, right? And then what we brought to it was all of our cinematic chops to make something that could have been, like watching the paint dry, a sort of inside baseball government beltway exercise. We crafted that into a thriller because we want this film to have the broadest audience possible. And I don't want folks to think of it as, a piece that's about voting one way or another. It's not. It's about what we can all agree on, hopefully, that is worth fighting for and worth protecting in our democratic process.
It's so funny that you called it a thriller, and what you said about getting people from both sides of the aisle. So it's not a partisan project. It's very much a nonpartisan project to show what would happen if something like an insurrection did occur again. Which brings me to this: when something like an insurrection happens, do you think it's more about politics than security, vice versa, and why? And I'll let Jesse start this time.
Yeah. Well, it's actually something that's addressed in the film, and why you see people who are nonpartisan, who are veterans of the U.S. military, who have spent their careers not taking a side, but actually defending the country and the Constitution. And yet, these decisions that the president has to make, he's an elected political official, but he actually governs the country, and the people are his constituency. And so I think watching the president in this scenario sort of navigate these questions of politics and party and security is a reflection of the real world environment in which our presidents, our leaders govern and manage these crises. And I loved making this movie because I felt like I had a seat in the White House Situation Room, and I could watch the president wrestle with this decision. You know, normally we watch The West Wing or a movie, and these are people who've sat at that table, who have been U.S. senators and governors and four-star generals. They know what they're talking about. They're not actors, and they're drawing on their experience. And I felt privileged as an American to watch how hard it is to make some of these decisions that you mentioned about keeping our country secure, our democracy secure, the peaceful transfer of power secure. And you know what they say about the president is if the problem reaches his desk, it's a really bad, tough problem. And I think that's what we see here is one of the worst problems. They call it the nuclear option, this Insurrection Act, which is the power the president has to deploy U.S. military on domestic soil. And we need to talk about that.
The definition of terrorism is deploying violence for political ends, right? So we are talking about domestic terrorism. I think we live in an era in which we cannot agree on truth. We cannot agree on the fundamentals. It's as if half of our country is saying the earth is flat, and the other saying no, it's round, and we just can't agree. And that's incredibly terrifying and incredibly dangerous. And the fact that there are leaders who stoke and thrive on this disinformation space is really dangerous and insidious. But I think another component of it is caste and race. I mean, those are the sort of underlying conditions that lead to, the MAGA movement, let's just say, to a large swath of Americans feeling like they're being deprived, they're being lied to, they're being cheated, right? It's also, it's from the Southern playbook that Nixon deployed. I mean, it's an old playbook. It's a way of dividing and conquering.
Over, because I'm sure a lot of what went down and a lot of what you heard, you didn't know going into it. But what was the one thing that when you walked away from it, you were glad that you found out and made you a little more educated and a little more well-rounded in terms of this particular subject?
I knew that 1 in 5 of the insurrectionists on January 6, 2021 were military veterans, but I don't think I myself had thought seriously about extremism in the military. And I think what I learned from Janessa Goldbeck, a former Marine and now the head of Vet Voice, is that the military is America in all its strength and some of its weaknesses. And it's not disloyal or unpatriotic to expect the institution to look at itself, and if it has a problem with extremism, to root it out.
And then I learned this term that I love and I hold on to now, which is a normalcy bias. Right. And maybe this is a powerful term to share with your listeners. It's the idea that because something has always been one way, it will always be that way. So the idea that the ship of state has always righted itself. We went through the civil rights movement. We survived. We went through the assassination of Dr. King and JFK. We survived. The assumption that we will go through bumpy patches and survive, we may lose this thing that we call democracy. And I do believe that it hangs in the balance.
Well, there's nothing I can say after that. My goodness. You put a nice little bow on it for me. Thank you so much.